Welcome to FO Talks. I'm Peter Isaacson, Chief Strategy Officer at Fair Observer. Today I have the honor of welcoming back Jean-Daniel Ruch, the Swiss diplomat, former ambassador to Serbia and Montenegro, Israel, and Turkey. Jean-Daniel began his career at the Ministry of Defense in Switzerland and moved on to the diplomatic service in 1992. He's also served as political advisor to UN's Yugoslavia War Crimes Tribunal prosecutor, Carla Del Ponte, which is something that may come back into the conversation. Great to see you again, Daniel.
How are you? Hi, Peter. Hello, everyone. Good to be here.
Okay, so today I want to talk about a number of things because the world has really changed. I think we spoke about a month and a half ago, and the world has undergone a few changes since then and is undergoing continuing changes. Let's look at the first thing that everyone's talking about now. What's happening in the US? You've got the delicacy of Biden's candidacy status as the Democratic candidate, who's being contested even by his friends, and you've got an assassination attempt on Trump. How do you see that, and how do you see the impact of that on things that are going on in the world today?
Well, the first thing I would like to say, and it's really a tribute to American democracy, it is that everybody has condemned this assassination attempt. Of course, there have been here and there attempts to use it politically for this or that purpose. But if you look at the main contenders, the main actors on the domestic politics in the US, they have really tried to pass a message of unity and of commitment to democratic values. And I think that's very important because that came as much from Joe Biden himself and also from Donald Trump. I think Donald Trump's first reaction was, we have to show unity. And that's a very positive thing. And I would like to underline that to start with. Now, what does that mean for November? Well, I think all the polls, empirically, it looks like both things. The debate of late June, where Biden did not appear in his best day, let's put it this way, and the assassination attempt the other day, they both seem to play in favor of Donald Trump. So I think I think bookmakers today probably put the probability that Donald Trump will be reelected very high. Now, the other question is, what does that mean for US foreign policy? What does that mean for the world? Is it better? Is it worse? We don't know, because what it means first is a lot of uncertainty. Now, I know markets usually don't like uncertainty. Nobody likes uncertainty, but this is what we have to cope with until we know what Trump will be if he's elected finally, as the polls seem to predict.
There's a lot more suspense than that from my point of view as an American, and especially as an American who lived through the events of 1968, when we also had assassinations, but successful ones. The two major assassinations of 68 were Martin Luther King and then Bobby Kennedy, the father of another Bobby Kennedy, who's present this year. And curiously, there was a slight scandal earlier or late last year, I guess, when Kennedy, the younger Kennedy, declared that he would run for president, first as a Democrat, then as an independent, and requested Secret Service detail for which is theoretically given to anyone who's a serious candidate. And that was denied by the Biden administration. So I'm a little bit curious about whether that's going to be an issue this week, given what happened to Trump. But you see, there are a lot. It's not just a question for me of declaring unity and concern for the same kind of respect for life and liberty and open dialogue. I see this as being a complex issue, which raises a lot of other issues that are in the background. And if you look at it, there was in the Financial Times today, I think there's an article about America looks into the abyss, claiming that, well, observing that things are not very unified in the US. So
yeah, no, I don't say that everything is under control and wonderful, but I think that this message right after the event of saying, and Trump saying, let's show unity, I think that's very important. Now, this should not, I mean, this should not mask, this should not be the tree which is masking the forests. And yes, America is a very divided society. America is a violent society, but it has always been a violent society. Yeah. It's the highest number of crimes and murders in the world. So this is not something new. The fact that weapons are readily available very easily makes it, of course, even worse. But if there is, if the question is whether there is a probability that this violence, which is criminal so far, becomes political violence, leading to, I don't know, civil war, as some people fear, I think this is very much exaggerated at this stage. I remain confident to the strength of the American society, despite all the divisions. What makes this deep divide more difficult is rather in terms of governance and of trust in the world. I was talking to some Iranian people recently, and they said, the message I think said, we're ready to go back to JCPOA, and I think the new president has said that also. But how can we trust the other side? Yeah. You know, how can they commit when we are not sure whether in 4 years' time there will be a new president who will throw the deal in the bin and start with a new policy? So I think there is a problem, a structural problem with the American foreign policy when it comes to some changes. And you know, and when the elected politicians, the elected presidents, cannot really define a strategy which would be a 10-year, 20-year strategy like the Chinese or the Russians can do, because they have no democracy, then what is happening is that there is just a continuation of some trends which are being run for a very, very long time. Look at Gaza. Gaza is a typical case in point, where even though Biden would like very much and have worked hard to have a stop to this bloodshed, to have a ceasefire, release of the hostages, well, he cannot really do it, because doing it would be make a big break with what has been the standing US policy, which means only soft pressure on Israel, but never hard pressure.
Well, a lot of people have said he can do it. That is, he could simply cut off the military aid that he automatically supplies if he's that concerned. The question is, I see a couple of questions. One is, the official US policy is to support a two-state solution. And not many people believe that's viable, but I wanted to ask you about that, because you've been the ambassador to Israel. Is that a serious discussion?
Yeah,
and the other problem, of course, is whether Biden actually does have the power to intervene in a way that would influence Netanyahu.
On the second question, to continue, I think that would be such a break in the tradition of the routine, let's say, of the relations between Israel and the US, that it would be taking a huge risk. It would require a huge investment in political capital. And at this precise juncture, when we are reaching the final stages of the presidency of the election campaign, I don't think this is the risk that any president looking for a second term, or even one ending its second term, would do. As that's for the second part. For the third part, actually, I wrote an article, I don't know if you've seen it, on the feasibility. It's a kind of feasibility study of the two-state solution.
Yes, I did. Yeah, that was very good. I think I commented that was one of the best articles I've seen, where you lay out all the pros and cons.
I really tried to take a clinical look at that with no emotions, no partisan. And my conclusion is precisely that technically it would be feasible, technically, but it would require such a huge political investment, not just in Israel and in Palestine, but also among the world leaders, that it seems to me that it's rather unlikely that we'll see any progress anytime soon. And there are a number of major stumbling blocks. Many people say the ideology or the religion is the major stumbling block. Maybe, but I'm not so sure. I think the major stumbling block is the settlement policy. And the settlement policy has been a constant, has been a very consistent policy carried out by all Israeli governments since 1967. Since you are sitting in France, I cannot resist to quote Charles de Gaulle in 1967, after the 6 Days War. He made a press conference and he said, so despite our advice, there will be occupation. And occupation cannot go without deportation, repression, oppression, and resistance that the Israelis will call terrorism. So as long as this situation is not solved, of course, there will be resistance and there will be terrorist actions, because what we need is a political perspective. And this is, if there is a consensus in the world that was very apparent after the crime and the massacres of the 7th of October, it was the Russians, the Chinese, the Americans, the Europeans, all saying we need a political perspective. And the only political perspective they can imagine is a two-state solution. Because it's a bit like Churchill saying, democracy is the worst political system in the world except all others. There you can say the two-state solution is the worst possible solution except all others. What are the other options? A one-state solution? This is even more unlikely than a two-state solution, because it would mean the Palestinians would have the majority. And for the Jewish population, this is unacceptable. I mean, Israel is really was conceived as a Jewish homeland first, and now they even have a law on the state nation of the Jewish people. So if you're the Palestinian majority, it doesn't work. So this seems very unlikely. What are the other options? Ethnic cleansing, creating some like Indian reservations or Bantustan in the West Bank and in Gaza, surrounded by settlers and by Israeli security forces, and calling that a state. This is also unacceptable for the Palestinians. So therefore, the least worst solution is a two-state solution. You can call it confederation, like some people are trying to do now, but the problems to solve are the same. And the first problem to solve is, what do we do with the settlers? Now, I found some interesting statistics, recent ones, while writing this article about the willingness of the settlers. In the West Bank, we're talking about 450,000 roughly people. And they asked them, well, under which condition would you be ready to leave your house in these settlements, which under international law are all illegal? Now, something like 80% said, if I have the same economic conditions, so compensation, same housing, no more taxes and all these things, then I have no problems moving on the other side because we know here it's difficult. So many of them, they understand perfectly. And they are there for economic reasons. So it leaves us with only like 20%, which makes around 100,000 maybe people. And among those, the question is how many would be ready to resort to violence to defend their community and their settlement. And the result of this empirical study was that those who would be ready to use unlawful means, as they said, is very limited. So it's not impossible. And then if there is a dynamic and serious benefits associated, it's not completely impossible. It's certainly worth trying, because what are the other options? They are all bad in my
view. The situation appears to be getting worse. So you would think that if Israel understood that, and that's my question, do they understand what you're talking about? Do the Israeli leaders understand that? Because if they did, they would be doing the opposite of what they appear to be doing, which is arming the settlers, actually giving them military-grade weapons to take action as militias, to act as militias against the Palestinians in the West Bank. Don't you see that as the indication that the obstacle may be greater than the
there is what this government is doing, and everybody knows this is the most far-right, most pro-settler, most violent government in the history of Israel. But Israel is not just the government. Thanks God, Israel is a vibrant democracy with a civil society, with a free media, which are very critical. Last week, we had again in Geneva, I think 60 civil society organizations, both from Palestine and from Israel, to talk about ways to move forward in the direction of peace. So there is the actions of this government, which are outrageous and illegal. They are definitely also creating a counter reaction in the civil society. The question is whether this will translate one day into power and political power. And I think it's too early to say. We are still in the midst of this war. But I think the point or the objective of this civil society organization is to prepare for the day after, that some kind of perspective, positive perspective can be put in place. Now, if you look at this today, it's very naive. I agree with that, because now the train is definitely going towards more repression, more violence. And one question which I think everybody is struggling with, every government, but also the International Criminal Court and the International Court of Justice, is what are the true intentions of this Israeli government in Gaza and in the West Bank? Because we see an intensification, even now, even this weekend, this awful attack, which apparently killed the second-rate military leader, let's put it this way, but also like 100 civilians, not to speak about the people who are maimed, who are hurt. It's awful. What we have seen there, is it really worth? Is it proportional to the military target? These are tough questions for the lawyers in The Hague. And what is the final objective? Is it really to liberate the hostages and to destroy Hamas? Or is it something else? Is there a genocidal intent? I mean, the question is very much on the table. And this is really for the lawyer to decide. But we fail to see what are the true intentions of this government, especially as we see also more activities and more repression in the camps and in the cities of the West Bank. So yes, the violence is still there for a while.
So going back to the US attitude, the Biden administration, as you mentioned, as I mentioned, is theoretically committed to a two-state solution without giving any details about what that would look like. I don't think they even refer to the Oslo Accords anymore. They just say that what we need is a two-state solution. Between Biden and Trump, is there a difference in your perception?
Well, Trump has campaigned very much on his love for Israel and basically giving carte blanche to Netanyahu. I don't know, it's a campaign, so you never know whether it's tactical or whether he means it. Now, if you look at his policy, during his first term, it was the most pro-Israeli government probably that existed. By, he took these steps of moving the embassy to Jerusalem. Biden did not roll back this decision. Then he took the amazing steps, Trump, to pay the Moroccans, the Emirati, and others to normalize their relations with Israel. And it was actually the cost was paid by the US, for instance, by declaring that Western Sahara was a Moroccan territory, by selling some military toys to the Emirates and so on. So he has really done a lot. Has he been paid in return? I'm not sure. And there is a rumor going around that, and I think that there is some substance in that the relations between Trump and Netanyahu, who are both like alpha male type or very strong leaders, are not always, or maybe rocky at times. So it's hard to say now how these things will develop. But I could very well imagine that Trump would like to change his image in front of history and appear as a man of peace. Yeah. And he's so unpredictable. Maybe he's the guy who suddenly can say, can put serious pressure on the Israeli government. So this is really, we don't know. What we know is that Biden was not that type of guy who could put, or who was ready to invest the political capital to put serious pressure on Israel. And I think it's bad for Israel, because I must frankly, I worry at least as much for the Jewish Israelis as for the Palestinians. The Population and Immigration Authority has released a few weeks ago some statistics about the number of people who left Israel since October 7. And the figure was astounding. They're talking about 550,000 people. Now, according to what I hear, even though I haven't seen precise statistics, but what I hear, it seems that most of these people were high-tech entrepreneurs or people involved in this IT sector who decided, why should we continue to operate there when we can go to California or to Berlin or to wherever to continue to operate. Now, if it's true, it would mean that most of the people who left are Jews. And if you count that the population of Jews before this war was about 8 million, say 7.5 million probably, it means that you have what, 8%, 7-8% of the population left. I mean, this is dramatic. This is dramatic. There is really a strong interest for the Israelis, for the future of Israel, to stop this bloodshed as soon as possible and to allow for the economy to restart. The economic loss is dramatic. It's between 20 and 25% of GDP, which has been lost also. So I cannot understand how people don't see that, and I think it would be in the interest of Israel that America stops this war as they have the means to.
Can you confirm, or do you believe that the principal obstacle is Netanyahu himself? And a lot of people say that it is all about keeping the war going so that he isn't hauled before the courts and thrown into jail. He's already been hauled before the courts, so he will be thrown in jail. But the other argument is that he's doing this because he has to appease the ultra-right that are absolutely in favor of one solution and one solution only, which is Greater Israel.
Yeah, but Greater Israel with ethnic cleansing, probably, no?
Yeah, so
listen, there is, if I look at historical comparisons, I have seen this trend in the Balkans in the 90s, where you are always saying, no, you'd better support me because otherwise, look who is going to come to power. They are terrible. They are worse. They are. This was in the in the 90s. We had the same game being played between Milosevic and Shechet. We see that in a way in Russia today, where Putin is saying, better negotiate with me because those who may come after me, they are much worse than me. And Medvedev is making always very radical statements. So this is a kind of game that many strong leaders like to play. So I don't think this, of course, it's a democracy. We don't really know, but I believe that if there is a serious, credible perspective to stabilize the situation, to move towards peace, a change in the discourse, I don't think that those people would still be in power soon. So there could be a coalition of centrist elements with what remains from the left, Lapid, Gantz, and a few others who I think could have a much more reasonable policy and who could win a majority. But I think it's in our interest, the West, to tell the Israelis what you are doing is wrong.
But don't you think that if we can even envisage some kind of stabilizing, a cessation of combat and a stabilizing movement towards a two-state solution or any other type of solution, that it requires a pretty powerful international consensus. And that's where we come back to the US position, whether it's Biden or Trump.
Yeah, but
it's not a problem in itself, because getting the US, getting the way the world works today, you've got the West versus the rest, which is being aggravated on a daily basis. It seems to me that the whole BRICS phenomenon illustrates the fact that there's a refusal of understanding on the side of the West, and this is true of Europe, along with the US, which is simply aligned with the US. That seems to me that it will be very difficult, even if you could get the Saudis on board and the UAE and even Iran, because of their hope to have some kind of general solution for the Middle East. Isn't it difficult to imagine the kind of consensus that would be required to make anything work once it's decided or negotiated between the warring parties?
Our narrative, the narrative of the West suffers dramatically from the war in Gaza, or actually from our blind support to Israel in this war, but also in the occupation, in the settlement enterprise, because of the fact that we never took serious measures against violations of international law. So on the one hand, we criticize violations of international law by some actors. We take very strict sanctions. And on the other hand, so it's very easy to say, you are living in double standards. We don't take you very seriously. I think in our narrative, when we talk about a rules-based international order, about the primacy of international law, we are just not credible in the outside world, and we are giving actually a lot of arguments to dictatorships, to non-democratic regimes who are violating human rights, because they say, you're also doing it, or you are allowing others to do it, so we can also do it. So I think we really have a big problem with Israel from that, definitely from that point of view. Now, does it need a consensus? I think it's the policy of the West, and the policy of the West is, as we know, determined in Washington. So this is really there that the decision must be made. It's not easy to be the only superpower or the main superpower, because you have to take this kind of responsibilities.
So then we come back to the question, can Biden do it? Can Trump do it? Or could Kennedy do it?
Well, Kennedy, I think I don't see any realistic perspective that Kennedy can be. Well, they can do it if they want it. Now Biden, I'm not sure. Trump, who knows, because it's so unpredictable. So the future will tell. But I think we need, I mean, it would be also the role of Europe and of the main countries in Europe, meaning, and I'm talking Europe, not the EU, but countries like Germany, the UK, France, maybe Poland, maybe Norway, which has always been playing a very distinct and interesting role in the world, with a kind of trying to talk to all actors, being impartial. I think these countries, and maybe Canada also, these countries should get together and develop a kind of strategy for the West, which should be very different. And you are talking about the BRICS. It seems to me also, especially after the latest NATO summit, that we are the ones who want to create a conflict with the BRICS. But this cannot be in our interest, because especially not in the interest of countries like Germany and other European countries, which have, after all, still a very dynamic economic and trade relationship with China. There was an article by an American pundit in a Swiss media a few weeks ago, an economic and finance media, and basically was saying, well, tell your companies they should leave China urgently. And I guess what he had in mind was that China will collapse economically as a result of possible sanctions by the next US administration. Now, this cannot be in our interest. So we need a new understanding of our role in the world, much more modest. Ben Rhodes, by the way, the former advisor of Obama, really a very, very clever man. He wrote a wonderful article in the Foreign Affairs, I think it's in the last edition of Foreign Affairs, where he advocated more modesty in US foreign policy. And I think really that's the key. You know, when I was referring to the Iranians, which are of course a strategic state there, because what we've been doing over the past years, even though they were ready to go in the nuclear deal, everybody says they implemented their part of the deal. The West did not implement its whole part. And what these Iranians are basically saying, well, you have pushed us in the arms of the Russians and of the Chinese, who are ready to establish decent relationships with Europe, with the United States, but it should be based on mutual respect, and we don't see that you are respecting us. Look, the Israelis bombed our embassy in Damascus. Imagine if we had bombed an Israeli embassy anywhere in the world, the drama it would be. There have been zero condemnation from Western countries of this grave breach of international law. Second, our response has been super calibrated. We have waited 1 week. We have sent scores of drones, which takes 4 hours to travel so that they can really prepare. Of course, there were also missile strikes, but we have tried to be predictable and responsible. And we have seen no reward for that and no acknowledgement. So that's where I'm saying the West should start to think totally differently. And because I continue to have the feeling that the Western minds seem to like to divide the world between good and bad. You know, we are in a Western.
As a US American, I can say that this is unfortunately something's built into the culture that I grew up in. And what worries me, and so I'm much more pessimistic than you are, apparently. What worries me is that has now become consolidated as something, as the definition of political reality in the US.
Yes, that's why I was saying I think the European countries, because the European countries have other traditions. You know, in the centuries, the last 1,000 years, it was common that one king was allied with another king and then was enemy, and you know, all these games of alliances were always changing, and they were not in the realm of eschatology or theology. They were just doing the politics. And so the Europeans could really try to find their roots again, and then try to think in other terms than in terms of good and evil. But
That's
for
one
that,
of
they
the,
would need intellectually
yeah,
to find
that's
some
one,
independence.
that's one of the reasons why I claim, obviously no one will listen to this, that we should make French the language, again, bring it back as the language of diplomacy. French gave us words like détente and rapprochement, which have been adopted in English, but there's a mental structure that somehow exists in the French language, which allows you to see the world differently in the Anglo-Saxon version of it.
I think these other ways or more subtle ways to consider the world exists also in Arabic and in Turkish.
Yeah, yes, good point. Very good point. Well, multilingualism is one of the important things. And of course, it's the Anglo world and the American world in particular, but Anglo as well, that sees the triumph of English as the global language of commerce and politics to be the key to what you referred to earlier, which was the rules-based order. The rules-based order. Nobody knows what the rules are, but they know what they sound like when people open their
And
mouth.
at least we know who is saying what is right and what is wrong.
Yeah,
They know
exactly.
who should say what is right and what is wrong.
But we're seeing that actually. I don't know if you've been following this in India. The U.S. ambassador to India, Eric Garcetti, came out just the other day and said strategic ambiguity, which is the official position of India in terms of diplomacy, world diplomacy. He said strategic ambiguity makes no sense in a time of war. In other words, India must support, and specifically the war in Russia,
Yeah,
or
I've
in
seen
Ukraine.
that. Yeah. I have seen, and you are either with us or against us. That's
Exactly.
why we, small Switzerland, who usually manage to stay out of wars, we were also put under tremendous pressure, and we felt obliged to implement also the Western sanctions against Russia, even though in 2014 we could escape that by saying, no, we're going to make sure that sanctions are not circumvented through Switzerland, but we're not going to apply the sanctions. But this time we could not escape it because of this kind of American pressure. You know, we're not 1.3 billion people and India, and we depend very much for our trade and economic relations on America and the West. But you see, the question I think that any political leader in Europe should today ask himself is how does the public, my public opinion, react to all this?
But nobody consults public opinion.
Well, but sometimes they vote.
Sometimes they vote, but they don't vote on the issues that are decided when they're not voting. I give you the example, which I discovered thanks to a compatriot of yours, Pascal Lotaz. Do you know Pascal Lotaz?
No.
He's an IR specialist, and he gave the example of Finland, and that recently decided to join NATO. And he said the Finnish people were never consulted, and the polls show that they were reluctant to have that kind of engagement in NATO, which made them more vulnerable than ever to any threat that might come from Russia. If they had consulted the people and said, well, what do you think of this? A referendum, they wouldn't have been able to join NATO. So the decision and what that gives the impression that all these serious decisions are being made by committees of people that have no contact with the populations of their democracies.
Well, yes, but this is very dangerous if you take decisions which go against the will of a large majority of the people. You know, we are a little bit different because almost each and every decision can be attacked by a popular referendum where
yeah.
So and sometimes the government loses in these kind of things.
So speaking of governments, there's a question I wanted to ask.
But let me just say one thing before. I think the French elections have shown that the people are not ready to accept everything that comes from the top
Exactly.
without questioning, resisting, criticizing, and if they are not really having suffering any direct consequences from certain decisions, I don't know, to send weapons, this or that weapon to Ukraine, they may still suffer the consequences of big decisions which are being made. And I think that if the European economy is not going as well as it used to, it's also because of the sanctions that Europe has taken against Russia. And the people who are suffering the consequences are the people who see their bills and the price of gas and the price of everything, which is increasing. That creates discontent, and this can be recuperated by populist parties, which is what seems to be happening in several European countries.
Yeah, well, as a French citizen who voted in the two elections we had in June and July, I can tell you that just observing things on the ground, my interpretation of the vote that first came out in the European elections, largely in favor of the far right, the RN, was a protest vote. It was a protest vote against everything. It wasn't an identification with Le Pen's personal ideology or policies. It was the reflex to say, well, what political force in the country can challenge the system we don't understand and which is making all these decisions which we don't necessarily agree with. This came out very clearly in the Yellow Vest movement. Mm-hmm. That's where you could really take the temperature of how people were feeling about the way they were governed, which leads me to my next question. Is there any chance of there being a valid government in France for the next 12 months? Because constitutionally, well, we have a serious problem, and that is that resorting to elections is no longer possible. The president no longer has the power to call for a new election, a general election, before 12 months, having done it in June. So I think the only thing that's possible to do the kind of clarification that Macron said he wanted to do with the election would be for him to resign as president, and that would be a total constitutional.
Yeah, I don't believe that will happen.
No, that won't happen. But so how can is there any conceivable way that a French government that actually governs and that has some kinds of coherent policies internally and externally, can that happen in the next 12 months, or will it just be permanent chaos?
It doesn't need to be permanent chaos. Anyway, I think that in this period, it's unlikely that very important decisions or very important new programs can be decided. One thing. So it doesn't matter so much. Secondly, we have seen in other places that a country can live happily and do business good, even without a government. I think in Belgium once there was, what, 1 year and a half or maybe
Yes,
2
that's
years?
true.
Okay, Belgium is not France, maybe it's different. Thirdly, and this is where it's becoming a bit tricky, France is a presidential system where the powers of the president are huge compared to any other European country. So he can certainly run the daily business by resorting to Article 16, if I'm not mistaken, of the Constitution. Now that might create a lot of unease in the population and in the domestic political system, because it almost looks like Putin ruling by decree. Huh? So,
Yeah.
so I don't think that's a good idea. But theoretically, to manage a daily business, you could do that. The French need to do what they are not used to. They need to find alliances and compromise between various political parties. Now, since the creation of the Fifth Republic, you always had a very clear majority. Usually the right, then the socialists, then the right. I mean, but that was this kind of alternance. And then Macron sort of blew it all, not just with the most recent decision, but also when he created his party, La France En Marche, and so on. This was also something new, saying, no, the traditional parties, they have no value anymore. We're not anymore living in a right-left system of governance. Let's do something else. And he created his own party. But we see that somewhere this left-right values still exist in the society. And maybe it was a bit of an illusion to believe we can now move to a next phase in history where there are no more left parties who are sort of representing a kind of sensitivity, and the rightist parties who are representing a different kind of circles, or also sensitivities. So the challenge is to make people cooperate. And does Macron want that? Does Macron want to have somebody from the left? By the way, that was pretty amazing to see how the left managed to unite for this election. I had not expected that they would do something. And plus, they performed very strongly. So could the left find a way to negotiate with Les Républicains or with Macron's party, which remains strong after all? It's still the third largest party. So they have to learn to do that. I think they should, because if there is one thing I believe is that the political landscape in France in the long-term future will be more scattered. It won't be like this, a bit like the US, this bipartisan, almost bipartisan system. Now, most countries in Europe, they are used to do that. You know, in our government, which has been in place mostly with the same coalition more or less since 1959, we have trade unionists, leftists, who are in government with a nationalist right, you know, who have made their political success out of hate of Europe and immigration. You know, this Europe seems to discover these political parties. In our case, they have been there for well 30 years, and they have done well, actually. But we managed sometimes somewhat to absorb them in a government system which remains very democratic and, at the end of the day, tolerant, because we are obliged to compromise. So that's the future, I guess.
It seems to me very complex now for French people.
Yes.
They don't know what direction to take. They don't know what direction their leaders are willing to take or going to take. It seems to me that the level of uncertainty here, I have two nationalities, American and French, and in both cases I can see only chaos. But chaos always has a good side, because it forces, at some point, it forces you to find a solution to a new principle of organization.
Yes.
And I think we don't have that principle of organization nobody has it to offer on a platter today. So in a certain sense, the crises must get worse before that principle emerges.
But you know what is I think if we connect that to the international reality, this is of course not a good moment for having this kind of chaos in France, because it will be, I mean, France traditionally has been a leader of European diplomacy. They have really been the one, including Macron himself, by the way,
Yeah.
has developed, you know, visions, projects for Europe, also for peace with in Europe, and also for peace with Russia. At the beginning of the war, remember, he is the one who took the courage to go and meet Putin and try to find a way out of the crisis. So especially now, we would definitely need to have France and to have a strong France. And I really hope they manage to solve the crisis one way or another to navigate through these times until they get the next presidential election, which will probably redistribute all the cards.
That's 3 years away, so that's a lot of time to cover. Well, I remain optimistic, nevertheless, because I do believe that when things become clarified in terms of their gravity, we do tend to find solutions. But I have no idea what that solution
No, I
might be.
mean, but frankly, I think it's okay. It requires a little bit of goodwill and readiness to make compromises. Maybe the left should abandon its idea to tax people who earn more than 400,000 euros to 90%. But maybe also the others should listen more the left on environmental and social issues. So there are trade-offs to be made, I think, which would allow for government. And this is what most of the governments in the world do. They make these compromises between various, representing various social circles.
Yeah, the problem today, and this will last for a few months, I guess, is the problem of personalities and parties, and maneuvering to be perceived as being in a position of power, even if you're not exercising the power.
Mm-hmm.
We're going to have, I don't know how long.
But I think in this campaign, you have a number of individuals which have risen, and to prove to be statesmen, or at least good politicians, maybe statesmen. I'm talking of Ruffin, for instance, Glucksmann also. They have made a strong impression, I think, on many people, amazingly. So you have this new generation of politicians which are starting to appear and to get credibility for a large number of people within and outside of France.
I'm wondering whether it won't be one of the old timers who comes back, and that's Dominique de Villepin, but nobody likes him.
Well, and we've heard that François Hollande was re-elected. We heard that Sarkozy is trying to push himself. I think that would be really wrong. We need this new generation now to come to power in France.
All right.
Okay. And I like Dominique de Villepin. I mean, I had a chance to meet him once. I appreciate.
Well, he's a true diplomat. He truly.
Well, he's a true diplomat. When you hear him speaking about the mistakes of the West when dealing with Russia, or on Gaza, he's speaking very undiplomatic words.
Well, he's not in a position to represent anyone's position, but I will say this one thing about him, which he makes clear, and is the only person I know of in French politics who says it. He says, we have a problem in the West, in France, but in the West as a whole, and that is the way we are perceived by the rest of the world. We don't understand that it's very negative, and
yes.
that's
He understands
he's the
that.
only one. He's the only one who says that. Nobody else
Absolutely.
worries about how the rest of the world thinks.
Yeah. No, but I think that's what I was trying to say with the double standards before. And I enjoy watching Dominique de Villepin each time. I mean, definitely, if I would have a French passport and if he would be candidate for something, I would vote for him.
Yes, that's the way I feel. But he's not a part of any political system today. So
no, I think nobody wants. Nobody. It's very hard when you have such a charisma. Nobody really wants you because you are unfair competition. You are too good.
Anyway, okay, let's close the debate there. A lot of uncertainty. I think if we want to just say, is there any kind of conclusion we can reach, whether we're talking about Israel, Europe, US, the rest of the world? We keep butting our heads against a wall that says the reality today is total uncertainty.
Yes, and
that's the challenge we all have to face.
Yeah, and if I may make a small conclusion, it's also a little bit Western centrist to say we live in uncertainty, because if we look at there was a BRICS meeting recently. There will be a BRICS summit in October. So while we live in uncertainty, at least until the American election, in other parts of the world, they are reorganizing at a much quicker pace as we had thought.
Yes.
So, you have a few individuals in Europe. You know, I want to say something good about Viktor Orban, which is really politically totally incorrect. And really, by many, many ways, this guy is not my cup of tea. But using his first 2 weeks of EU presidency to go to Kiev, starting with Kiev, very important, Moscow, Beijing, and then Washington. Well, if the point was also to try to recreate connections and channels of communication between the BRICS, to put it widely, and the West, well, this kind of efforts need to some kind of recognition and support, in my view.
Yes, I was impressed by Orban's initiative, which put diplomacy back on the table as a point of discussion.
Yeah.
Whereas what we've seen is that there's a resistance to dialogue in general. So thank you very much, Jean-Daniel. I hope we can pick this up again, because all these issues are evolving, and I consider your insights to be particularly clarifying. And I'd love to continue the conversations on a regular basis.
Pleasure talking to you, Peter. Thank you so much.
Okay, thank you.
Bye.
Bye.
Join the conversation at Fair Observer and subscribe to our YouTube channel.